Last week, I made a post about not being able to coach positioning. That most of the time, you're trying to tell an athlete to get into a certain position, whether it's in the movement or in a static hold, and a lot of the time, you're not going to be able to coach that movement, right? Any cue that you're giving, it might not work. And we want to talk about why that is and to kind of clear that up, right? So I'm not against coaching and looking at quality of movement and saying you need to do this, you need to keep your heels down, you need to keep your chest up, etc. Right? That stuff's necessary, and of course, it definitely does help certain athletes. But there comes a point where if the athlete is not mobile enough or not strong enough to get themselves into or maintain a certain position, right? Any cue that you give them or any drill that you give them, or as many times as you want to say it over and over again, they're not going to be able to do it. So a couple examples of that is if you have an athlete who's trying to squat and you see their heels coming up off the ground and you cue them to keep their heels down, and now they're not able to get as low, or you start seeing their chest come forward in the squat, right? And you start saying, keep your chest up, and they're just not able to get down, right? And no matter how many times you cue them and you give them tactile cues where you're actually putting your hands on them, they're still not getting it, right? You may be wasting your time with those cues, telling them over and over and over again, right? And you may have that athlete every week or every day, and you're going to say, oh, I just keep telling him to squat lower and keep telling him to keep his heels down. He just doesn't listen. He's uncoachable. He doesn't want to do it. He just doesn't understand what to do. And a lot of times, most of the time, that's not the case, right? The athlete wants to do what you're telling them. They're just physically not capable. Right, and it might be a mobility thing, it might be a strength thing. And the important thing to recognize is that you're not going to be able to tell necessarily whether it is a strength thing or a mobility thing, or where that mobility limitation or strength imbalance or limitation is without testing for it, right? You're not going to be able to look at someone and say, oh, it's obviously your ankles because your knees won't go forward. It could be something else, right? It could be a strength issue. It could be that their knees won't actually flex that much. It could be that their hips aren't flexible enough to be able to get into that position, right? So it's important to break those movements down, test those positions, and have an idea of what that athlete's strength is like before you start trying to make a change in what you're doing, how you're going to cue them, and how you're going to coach them. All right, but there are some strategies immediately in a class or in a one-on-one situation for that day that you can use as a coach without even getting into that day or for that workout to maintain stimulus, right, and not force that athlete into a position that they can't get into. You have to start using your coach's hat, right, and find movements that are going to allow them to do basically the same thing, but allow it to be safe for them, right? So that could be, if it's a squat movement, they're just not going down as low. If squatting is a complete disaster for them, if they can't get anywhere, maybe you're making that a unilateral squat by giving them lunges or step-ups instead. If it's a pressing movement and you've got barbells going overhead, right, maybe they struggle with that overhead position, you're having them use dumbbells or kettlebells instead, right? So now they're not forcing themselves into that uncomfortable overhead position where they might be at risk for injury or unable to get into that position, right? They'll have a little bit more leeway. And that's just a couple of examples of what you can do. But to get a little further, right, with the strength issue, that's another one that you have to test for, and it's a little bit more difficult, right? If you see an athlete that when they squat, they're shifting to the right side, you can tell them all you want, shift to the left, you're shifting to your right, the barbell sideways, etc. They're doing that for a reason, right? And they're either protecting from a weakness or leaning towards a strength, or there's a mobility issue, and you're not going to know what that is until you give them a full assessment right across the board. Is one side stronger than the other? Does one side hurt, right? Is one side more flexible than the other? What's causing them to lean to that side, right? Sitting there and telling them, don't lean to the right, don't lean to the right, is actually putting them in danger because their body is doing that for a reason. It's protecting itself, and it's going to the easiest position that it can, right? It's going through the least resistance, right, that it can to get that movement done. So if you find yourself in a class situation or in a one-on-one session situation with an athlete and you're seeing a movement that you're not kind of liking what they're doing, how they're moving, and you've tried cueing and it's just not happening, right? for that movement, put on your coach's hat, find a different movement that will allow them to avoid that position that they can't get into, right? Or that will be safer for them, that'll still allow them to get the stimulus, whether it's squatting, pressing, pulling from the ground, pulling down, etc. Find something that you can do instead for that day or for that class, and then spend a little extra time with that athlete if you can, and maybe assess their mobility and their strength. And if you can't do that, right, try and refer them to or find somebody who can, right, to start to get that figured out for the future. It's kind of a good, better, best situation. Good is having them, okay, maybe we don't do that movement. Better is finding a similar movement for them to do, and best is getting them to fix the problem going forward. And you can start seeing this with performance on specific movements as well. So obviously with the Olympic lifts, for example, you're going to want to be cueing your athletes a lot, right? The more you can do that, the better. It's a highly technical lift or highly technical movement, right? And they need your coaching. They can't see the positions they're in. They're moving fast. There's a lot of moving parts, right? And as a coach, you need to have a good eye and be able to identify what's going on and come up with corrections and cues to do it, right? But that's only going to go so far in a lot of cases, right? If you have an athlete, for example, who is leaning back on a clean every time, they lean back early, right? They can't keep their chest over the bar. They might even be hitting their knees on the way up, right? And no matter how many times you cue them, I need you to stay over the bar. I need you to keep your legs straighter longer. I need you to, whatever it is. And obviously the more ways you can say it, the better, right? Because sometimes people just need to hear it said a certain way for it to start to click, right? But you may be getting frustrated with that, and it might not be that they don't understand what to do or that your cue is bad, but simply that their body just doesn't understand it or is not able to do it, right? If you do get them to understand it and it starts to click and they make the correction, okay, you'll start to see it happening with lighter weight. But going forward, as it starts to get heavier again, their body is going to revert back to that path of least resistance or do whatever it's strongest at, right? It's heavy, you're getting to a maximal load, your body's saying, oh, you want me to get this up off the ground and get it into my legs and into my hips so I can clean it and jump and get under it? Okay, this is how I'm going to do that because this is where I'm strongest, right? So an athlete like that who can't stay over the bar is probably not strong in a hinge movement. They're probably more squat dominant, better at squatting than they are at hinging, meaning deadlifting, pulling from the floor, good mornings, etc. Right? So what can you do with that athlete? Well, test them and find out if that's true, right? No matter how many times you cue them, stay over the bar, stay over the bar, stay over the bar, right? And you remind them of that and you say it over and over and you have them do pauses in that position, etc. That'll help a little bit, right? And drilling it at the lighter weights will help as well. But when it gets heavy again, they're not going to have that strength, okay? So they're going to revert back to that bad habit. So knowing your athlete's strengths and weaknesses and knowing how to fix them and what to do going forward, that's a relatively simple example for a very complex movement, right? Somebody who is a squat dominant person is not a strong hinger. No matter how much they understand and how much you cue them and how much you drill them to stay over the bar, they're going to have that tendency to lean back and get behind the bar early, right? So it's not just an injury prevention thing, which it very much is, but it's also a performance situation. And that goes for the mobility as well, right? Think about somebody who doesn't have the mobility to get into the bottom of an overhead squat. And you're telling them, get lower, stay on your heels, keep the bar back, don't let it come forward, keep your elbows locked. If they can't do it, they can't do it, right? And you telling them, I need you to get it here, I need you to get it here, and just telling them, okay, keep lifting and do it again, but now try and keep your heels down. By having them do that over and over and over again, they're going to start to compensate somewhere, or if they don't, right, they're going to injure some specific area that you can obviously see what it is. If their heels are coming up, right, their knees are going to get pretty pissed off pretty soon, right? But they might start to compensate somewhere else, right? The shoulders might be open enough that they can make up for the lack of range of motion at the ankles, for example, right? But now the shoulders are doing that much more work. Okay, and you're asking that much more of the shoulders, and that limitation is going to unveil itself somewhere else, right? So that kind of goes into, again, just because an athlete is feeling pain in a certain area doesn't necessarily mean that area is the problem. Somebody could have shoulder pain, right? And their shoulders move perfectly well. They're good and mobile at their shoulders. You test their upper body strength. You know their upper body strength is good. So why does their shoulder hurt, right? It could be because their shoulder is doing more work or being put in a position that it doesn't need to be in because of something else, right? So picking and choosing what movements or what body parts you're going to test or you're going to be aware of or pay attention to doesn't really work, right? You really want to have that full scope of the athlete when there is a problem or when you see an issue with their movement and cueing just isn't working, and neurologically they understand the movement. You got to get the full scope, right? And then it becomes very easy. Whatever is deficient, whatever doesn't work, whatever is limited, that's what you work on, and you'll start to see the correction with the other things. And most commonly where we see that mistake, right, with assuming the pain is because of something, is from side to side, right? It's my right shoulder hurts. Okay, that must mean there's something wrong with my right shoulder. And you strength test or mobility test, and you find that the limitation is actually on the left side, right? How does that make sense? But the right shoulder hurts. So why am I trying to fix a limitation on the left side? Well, if the athlete is doing a lot of barbell stuff and they're not really working unilaterally, right? You're never isolating one side versus the other, right? The right arm, the one that's stronger and the one that has the better mobility is doing most of the work, right? So it's getting burnt out. The left one is giving out because maybe it's weaker or doesn't have the mobility to get in the position, right? Every time they put that barbell overhead, the right arm, especially when they're fatigued, is taking the brunt of that, right? And it's getting overworked. Okay, so now we need to build up the strength, the endurance, or get rid of the mobility limitation on the left side so that the left arm can start contributing, right? And how do we do that? Obviously by going unilaterally, right? Split the arms up. And you only work to the capacity of that weaker arm, right? So obviously in this case, the left arm is weaker or has less endurance. We're going to work the left arm to its capacity to build up its capacity, right? And we're just going to maintain the right arm. We're not going to have the right arm do more, even though it can. It's going to do the same amount of work as the left, so that the left can catch up, as opposed to just making it even worse by having the right arm do more, right? So that's one example. What can also happen, right, in the same situation, that right arm is stronger, has better mobility, has better endurance, right, than the left. But the left one hurts because it can't keep up, right? And it's getting overloaded because it's already stressed, it's already tired, and you're making it continue to go, right? That can happen as well. That left arm can't keep up, it's not as mobile, so it's getting hurt being put in that position, right? Or doing those extra reps where the right arm feels fine, and you're keep going because your right arm feels fine, but then your left arm starts to hurt, because it's done, right? It's not that strong. It doesn't have that endurance, right? So assuming the side that hurts is the problem, or vice versa, doesn't work either, right? So you have to know that it actually is that body part and know which side it is, and that's where the testing comes in. That's the importance of assessing the athlete. So in the end, the moral of the story, you might say, or what you can take away from this is, it might seem sometimes like assessing an athlete's mobility or strength is a waste of time, or takes a lot of time, and it's getting in the way of other training or other things that you can be doing. But in the long run, it's going to save you so much time of, again, having to cue things over and over and over again that it's just not going to happen, right? And it's going to give you that bullseye on what you need to work on and how to fix it. So obviously it's going to help you keep that athlete out of pain and start moving them in the right direction. Okay, so it's going to save time with that. You're keeping athletes in the gym, you're keeping them training, you're keeping them moving, rather than having to miss because of injury, or backtrack, or let things rest, or refer them out to a doctor, etc. If you know what's going on, you can start moving forward with them, right? And again, it's going to save you time with your cueing. You're not going to sit there banging your head against the wall saying, man, why can't I get this guy to squat properly? Because his ankles or hips or knees don't move, right? And they're not going to get there. Or every time he squats, he keeps his chest forward. Yeah, because he's really, really, really strong at deadlifting and really, really weak in the squat. So that's how he's going to squat. Okay, vice versa. He might be squatting his deadlift. Why is he doing that? Well, because he's not strong enough in the deadlift, so his body's reverting back to that strong position. Either way, their strength or their mobility is basically telling their body how to move, right? And rather than cueing against that, start to make changes to that, or find somebody who can, and that's going to save you time and make your athlete that much happier, right? And so that you can start working on what you actually want to work on, increasing their capacity, working through their skills and their specific lifts, and actually getting them fitter.